Okay, and we're live. So, welcome to another episode of Cyber Bites, the podcast. Today, I'm joined by Jake Bernardes, who is the CISO at Anecdotes. Jake, pleasure to have you on. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, always a pleasure to be here.
You're welcome. Are you same as me at the moment? You're UK based right now.
I am. I've had a strange career where most of at least the last 10 years of my life I've been living in the UK, but technically working in the US and or Israel. So I've never worked in my home country. It's always strange. I go to networking events and I know lots of people, but they're always like, who do you work for? I'm like, not a company you've probably ever heard of. You might have bored us, but we're definitely not local.
Yeah, it's one of those, isn't it? It's just the ecosystem outside of it's growing in the UK, to be fair, but Israel and US is where it's at mainly, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I came up in the career really in Silicon Valley, so that's kind of where I suppose my heart always lies on the West Coast.
Yeah, for sure. The way I like to start these podcasts, Jake, can you tell the audience who you are and how you fell into cybersecurity?
Yeah, of course. My name is Jay Bernardes. I'm currently the CISO at Anecdotes and hold a number of fractional CISO and advisory roles outside of that. How did I fall into cybersecurity? I've answered that question a lot of times. I've been in a lot of these similar podcasts, and I'm always going back and seeing that I answer slightly different every time. So I'm lacking consistency, or I'm not sure myself. But I think that's part of it. I think there's a mindset in cyber. I think there is a desire to want to break things, to problem solve, to do what doesn't no one else knows how to do. I guess I fell into it when I was a really young kid. My dad bought an Amstrad that used to be half Windows. This is way too old for you. Half Windows 3.1, half Sega Mega Drive. You could swap it. And I remember as a kid trying to find ways, firstly, to break the games, like to try and find ways to cheat to make life more enjoyable. And then second, I remember taking it apart and then getting into PC building like people did way back in the 90s. And I think for me, that's where kind of the fascination started. Since then, I've worked a whole number of roles. I was in a finance company, I was at IBM. They've always been technology based, but it wasn't until I was at KPMG that I probably fell into security properly, traversed into pen testing, and kind of took a more formalized route. Since then, I've lived and worked all over the world, the Far East, the Middle East, all over Europe. I've lived and worked in the US, done everything from pen testing, where I was a social engineering expert, to generic consulting, to incident response, to vCISO, to CISO. I think I've held most jobs now other than being a SOC analyst. So yeah, I don't know how I fell into it, but I think people just have a predisposition to it, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. And how did the dynamic? So you started, am I correct to say, started more on the technical side, so pen testing, right? And then have slowly kind of transitioned into Field CISO, so where you're focused on essentially sales. How did that dynamic kind of change?
I think there's a longer journey there. I started as technical testing and specifically more in social engineering, which is human manipulation rather than it is like an infra level code base. I mean, I can do Kali and stuff, but like that was where my fun and like kind of my skill set lies. I
Mm,
think you then traverse into more generic consulting when you realize you have the strategic and commercial skills. If you go into like GRC or kind of traditional risk consulting and start talking about programs and strategy and helping kind of deliver that stuff, it's often higher profitability margins in that. And if you've got the skill set to hold those conversations at a client and executive level that I think often people are pulled across naturally. I think then as you progress your career, I went from that and there's a number of years we can hold that conversation how I ended up as a head of security at MemSQL and then VP and so forth and CISO. But I think it's just about recognizing what you're good at. I've realized over time that I have technical skills, but what I'm good at is translating those into how we talk to strategic points, how we talk to businesses about business outcomes, ROI, impact, what that means kind of in a more conceptual, strategic sense than what it means about kind of hands-on keyboard. And I think as you start to recognize those skills, you start to actually think, what else am I good at? And for me, I'm a storyteller. Like I'm not a great presenter with deep technical decks and lots of text and images and graphics, but I like to relate things back to analogies and to our lives. And I think what I found is that I have a good way in relating to people and explaining the concepts around what I believe or what I think. And then I think the other one is being opinionated. What you find a lot that move into kind of more the sales roles, especially in the security world, is you can't be on the fence. You have to be divisive. Like if you watch enough of my podcasts or read enough of my posts, I have opinions. People will disagree, which I'm fine with. But I think you've got to hold those. If you don't have conviction in your own beliefs, then it's very hard to try and sell, quote unquote, anything.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting. The storytelling piece is so key in sales specifically. So it's interesting you have that just kind of natural skill to be able to craft that story. And I think the analogy thing's huge as well, right? Make it relatable.
Yeah, I mean, I think storytelling is a thing you can teach, but I also think it's a thing that people either have, right? And I think, I mean, we could get philosophically, but I think a lot of that goes back to what you read to as a child. Did you have stories? And like,
Mm,
I remember my dad just making stuff up. I was pretty gullible as a kid, and I believed all kinds of crap that was probably not. I probably repeated it in school, and the teachers probably thought I was mad. But like, I grew up with that kind of storytelling element inside of my life, and I think I've
yeah.
always kind of built that. I think analogy wise, you've got to bring things back to real life. Like, what do people understand? Whether that is for me, I'm a big cyclist or a big runner. Like, how do you relate that back? And I presented a GCP event at the back end of last year, all about how I use Runner connected to Strava, which is an app which gets you faster, and how I went from running like a 4 hour to a 3 hour marathon based on using and leveraging data, and how that it's similarly in security. If you understand the data, you know where to focus and how to train and progress to specific points and achievements.
Mm,
So I think a lot of the time, yeah, it's finding the story. It's not shoehorning. It's finding the story that naturally fits to what you're trying to explain,
yeah.
and making that relatable and consumable, that it's remembered.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, we'll have to talk about that another time. But sub 3 hour marathon you ran. Impressive.
I'm just outside,
Nice.
frustratingly. I'm minutes out. I'm a couple of minutes outside of a three. Hopefully, this year is the year.
Dude, that's impressive though. Talk to us like using that analogy then and maybe relating it back into cyber. So the 4 hour to the 3 hour and use that app. I haven't heard of it, but Runner to help reduce that time then. How can you like and how do you use those links into cyber and in the business world? 'Cause it sounds like you're a sports guy. You're really passionate about that. Um, yeah, how do you go about doing that? And can you give me some maybe an example of how you've been able to use similar thinking in the business world? Or has it been sports taught you that, or business has taught you what's good in sports world?
I think that's life, right? I'm now approaching 40. I'm not old, but I've done enough to understand a bit about some things, and I think you learn from both sides and you apply both sides in your kind of personal lives and your professional lives. And if you look at the runner one, that's an interesting concept which I use quite a lot actually. So runner's based around the idea that if you're running, you're just running. So what it does is it focuses training regimes. It says like, where are you at right now? Where do you want to get to? It'll give you a mix of kind of long runs, easy runs, kind of tempo sessions, interval sessions. It then obviously, as we're in 2025, uses AI to then understand how you performed against your session to tweak and change the next one to match it to whether you overachieved or underachieved to make sure you're constantly progressing and to build you to a goal. So it will say at the beginning of a 16-week plan, at the end of this, you're going to run a marathon in 3 hours, 3 minutes. Right. And I've used it now for a half, a full, another half, another full, in fact. And I've been within a minute every time. Now, someone could argue there's a placebo effect. I'm running to the time I'm expecting. But the reality is that after 16 weeks of training and trying to push yourself, that's quite a staggering level of accuracy. Now, how you apply that into our business world is quite simple. Like I said, if you're just running on Strava, you go out for a run, you do a 5K, you try and go fast, meh, right? You get home, you've literally just run. Like you have no idea why you were faster today than you were yesterday. You have no idea why you were slower tomorrow than you were today. Like none of this makes any sense. You're just running until you start to apply the data to it, the science on top of that, and understand that you're running because your VO2 threshold is not high enough, because you've not done enough interval sessions to take your body to the like sub 18-minute 5K and how that feels and be able to sustain that and deal with it, which is an interval practice thing. Because you've not done enough time at slow speeds because you build up cardio improvements slow in order to fast speed. So all these things kind of work. And I think similarly in cyber, right, we have a massive problem with data, huge amounts of it. Every tool promises I'll give you these logs and this data before you even get into like GCP and AWS. Like the data pains are massive, but we don't do anything with it. Often I think similarly in cyber, it's like the whole running concept. We just do it
Mm,
and it kind of works and we get through, but we're not really thinking like, how do I leverage what I've got to improve, to get more efficient, to get more effective, to get more mature? Like, how do I get better from the data that I've got being input?
mm,
Or even just beyond that, I think most CISOs are surviving. Like thriving is not just succeeding. Thriving is knowing what do I want to be in 6 months, in 12 months, in 18 months, in 36 months, like as a company or as an individual. And I think you've got to plan toward that. And then in the modern world where data is so powerful, find a way to harness and use that to make yourself milestones to get you there. I think
mm,
that's the running analogy, but it
yeah.
plays so powerfully inside of our world specifically where data is just flowing.
Yeah, I love that. There's a couple of things just wanted to pick there. I like the thrive versus survive kind of analogy as well. Like as you say, a lot of CISOs are probably just trying to survive, get past day by day, but how many are thinking about that thrive piece, which is interesting. The other point is, have you read Atomic Habits out of interest?
I've not, no,
You
but I'll
should
put it on the
definitely
list.
read that. It's just because they use a cycling analogy around getting 1% better. You'd like
Okay.
it. But it
Is
ties
that
back
based
in.
on Dave Brailsford's stuff at Team Sky?
Yes, it
Yeah,
is. Yes,
yeah.
and it's very interesting how he goes to the extreme of like just the whole environment around sport, like what they're wearing, the equipment, just making everything like that point something percent better that's going to improve them. But yeah, what's your take on the thrive versus survive then? Like within a CISO, you've been in that CISO community. Do you think people are just trying to survive and get by because of that whole data problem, or is there more to it there?
That's a long question. I think there's a lot of parts to that. So let's unpick a few of them at least. I think we're in a transitionary phase. I think there are, if you sit in a lot of CISO forums or meetings right now, there are old versus new. I belong very much to the new school. We grew up in SaaS. We
Mhm.
grew up in accepting risk. We grew up in driving value. We grew up in we are part of ELT. Whereas the previous generation grew up in on-prem security, saying no to everybody to protect things, and their ROI being this might happen, I'll stop it from happening.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's point one. There is a transition right now in two types of CISO, and it's generational, and they see the world very differently.
Hmm.
I think also the rise in security products and the rise of the security world has given rise to the vendor CISO. And vendor CISO see things again in a different way. But in how much do they drive value from being a field CISO or being a point of reference, being kind of an evangelist. So I think that's another part of the conversation too.
Hmm.
I think the second is who are you? Like, and what do you want to be? That really makes a big difference. So a surviving CISO is told these are your responsibilities and they do them because they want to keep their job and they do them to the best of their abilities. A thriving one says, who am I supposed to be in this business? Right? A lot of us now sit in ELTs and executive leadership teams on the board. A lot of us don't have the right to be there. And that's maybe overly critical, but the reality is most security leaders, the first CISO is like less than 20 years old, look like the first CFO or first CRO. We're going back like hundreds of years
Yeah.
in reality with different titles. They haven't got the ability to, I think, to work at that level yet. Especially if they didn't come from the consulting world where they've had to deal with a lot of strategic inputs and strategic kind of advisory stances. So it is this recognition between the fact that your ROI is not, well, you might get breached and it might cost 15 million, so I need a million to stop this, right? That's not ROI because it's hypothetical.
Hmm.
Your ROI should be the business outcome is to drive ARR. It's to sell more cans of beans if you're Heinz. It's to sell more sunglasses if you're Maui Jim. It's to sell more shoes if you're Crocs, right? How am I and my team helping you achieve that business outcome?
Hmm.
If I can't speak to that coherently, I shouldn't be sitting at that table because I have no right and reason to be there. I might as well just be reporting on what my metrics are. So I think that is a big one in terms of thriving. It's being able to step beyond the I manage security to I actually input at a strategic level. And I
Yeah.
think that then goes broader even more right now. A lot of people have been talking about the fall of the CISO after the rise of the CISO. Do we need them anymore? Is it pointless? Um, there's a whole other argument whether CIOs are relevant these days. I think CIOs are now irrelevant. I think CISOs manage security and what do you have that you manage in the technical world that the security can't cover?
Hmm.
But I think more importantly is we become like a security cultured world where it's got to permeate through all the parts of the business. I shouldn't be scared that I'm no longer relevant because security is being led in legal and in compliance and in development and in HR. I should be saying that's a great thing. Like I'm now an advisor to the business. I'm like legal counsel. I'm trying to steer things in the right direction. It merely the role is changing, and
Yeah.
thriving means your adaptability to not just change with it, but change ahead of it.
Mm. Yeah. And on that point then, so changing ahead, what are you potentially from what you read and what you speak to with peers, how are you seeing the role evolving then? So you've got this kind of merge of your kind of generation, as you say, versus the older generation, as you described. What does maybe the next 5 years potentially look like, in your opinion? 5, 10 years?
I mean, I'm always one that just says I'm never going to call beyond 6 months because I remember I called AI coming and
Hmm.
I was 6 months before it and I was at OpenAI quite quickly after it, really early in like September a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
But I couldn't have called it 6 months before that. Like no
fair
chance.
enough.
So, so I'm always worried to call technology, but I would say from a leadership stance, it's a shift of a shop of no to a shop of yes. A modern CISO has to say, it's not about me saying you can or can't do this, it's about me saying how we can do this.
Okay.
And that's in all places, in all ways. Like you have to facilitate, you can't be a no. You've got to move from being risk focused to like, I'm stopping this risk to saying I'm enabling this outcome. You've got to become business leaders. So I think that's the key. And that's not just in SaaS or in security world. That's across the board. That's what you need to do right now.
Hmm.
And I think the shift away from being, yes, we need technical leaders. I'll never say that people should be technical because I think that's a core component. I think it's terrible when people aren't. But you need to have the strategic advisory side. Like if you can't see ahead and think about the steps that will get you there, your skills and understanding of technology become irrelevant. Like you've got to be able to relate those to achieving objectives and to strategic kind of points in the future.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And moving on to like the field CISO versus CISO role, you've been a buyer and a seller. Can you talk to me around that dynamic? If people don't know the difference, first of all, the field CISO versus a CISO, what is that? And then we're diving deeper from there.
So I think we know what a CISO is. A field CISO is commonly or more commonly found in security companies, so vendors, where you have an individual who's usually, hopefully, has always been a CISO several times before,
Hmm.
knows security, knows the industry, has a strong network, knows how to craft a message, knows how to tell stories. And they're there for a number of things. They're there to generate noise. So by speaking, podcasting, blogging, by having thoughts around your specific area, in our case, it's GRC, that's what we do. Um, and being able to craft a message that an audience receives in a way they receive it, right? Knowing how to speak to the audience because you are the audience. I think it's then supporting and being an independent advisor in that customer journey. So in that sales cycle, being the one in the room that says, is this right for you? I know the AE wants to sell it to you, but is this right for you? Yes or no? And like having the credibility and also, I suppose, the conviction to say sometimes to your own company, there's no point selling this, we're just going to churn it.
Okay.
Like, don't
Yeah.
sell it. So I think that's a key one too. Helping retain customers, whether that is being you were talking. I was talking to our CEO the other day about this actually. We have a lot in you have onboarding buddies, right? When you join a company, someone helps you onboard. I
Yeah.
think one of the roles of a field CISO and their extended team is to be onboarding buddies to customers. Like to be that friend who says, yeah, you know what, this is a bit of a pain. This is what we do internally, or this is what I did when I was a customer. Most field CISOs often have been a customer. I was a customer of Anecdotes before. Most have been a customer before they joined the company because that means they know the product.
Yep.
Their piece is really go to market without carrying a quota, but support all the operations that do it. And why that works is because we understand the audience better. We have the network. I sit in a lot of security groups. I don't need to sell. Like people ask me what we do, and I talk about it. And I talk about why I think the product is good, and almost like then steer it in a different way. So I think it's a really interesting role. And I think if you don't have a field CISO in your security vendor, your CISO needs to be good enough to do it.
Hmm.
You don't have anybody who's on the front foot from a security stance. It looks a little bit odd, I think now. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Is is there do you think there's a point, is a vendor too early to have a field CISO? Is there a point when that typically comes in?
I think you need ARR. So I think any business that's pre like pre A round makes no sense at all. You need to have the operations to support it. You need the revenue to support it, right? And the reality is it's almost a shot in the dark. So my efforts as a field CISO might generate 1.5 million in pipe. That might convert if your hit rate's really good to 500K in ARR, but it might result in pipe of 200K and no conversion. Like you're not quoted, right? So you've got to have that ability to lose that money. It's almost like they say you shouldn't invest in Bitcoin unless you can afford to lose it all, right?
Yeah.
I kind of think feels this is the same way, which is why I gave the caveat that if you're not going to get one, hire a CISO who's good enough, like publicly to go on podcasts, webinars, to blog, to be in front of people who's networked, who knows how to support a sales team. Hire a
Hmm.
CISO who can wear both hats, which is what we now do. I traversed after our CISO left. I traversed from being field CISO to being CISO, VP of IT, and field CISO. And for me, you can do all those three if you have that skill set. It's a luxury to have the other one.
Yeah. How do you support sales as well? Because I can imagine well, you've kind of touched on this. You have a very unique advantage to most sales reps who just have a career in sales, right? They may have a technical background in college or whatever, but how would you actually partner and work closely with the sales team to help around that messaging piece?
I think there's different stages in the process. I think firstly is a lead generation. Like I've directly just brought leads in of like whatever, a million plus of just people I know who we've had conversations on, you should talk to these and link them up. I think the second is then, yeah, being able to speak to it. So when they say something, often the salesperson doesn't really understand what they're saying. And that's not criticism of the salesperson. It's very hard to understand all the nuances of the security world. I can understand from the intonation of what they're saying, what they're getting at, because I've been there.
Yeah.
So I also know how to relate our problem and say, well, actually, our product solves this problem. And the salesperson afterwards will go, well, actually, it doesn't. I'm like, well, it does. Like, we don't know it does, but it does. So I think having that ability, the back channeling is important. A lot of these people I either know or I sit on the Slack channels and networks that they sit on. So I can ping them and say, oh, I've heard you talking to our AE. Like, how's it going? Like, what can I do to try and help?
Mm.
And I think then trying to be that independent intermediary. And then I think when it comes to closing, I can often have, the AE says, like, is this price realistic? And I can go, no, you've got no chance. They're currently using this product. There's no way they're going to spend that. Or actually, the customer's saying, I'm only going to pay this. And I'm like, well, you should charge them more because, quite frankly, like, I know what they've got in terms of what they're spending on other tools.
Mhm.
So I think often it's being kind of the friend to both sides. It's a bit of a weird role where you're stuck kind of in the middle because you can't, if you damage your network by being too heavily supportive of your own company, then you lose your value. But at
Yeah.
the same time, if you only ever support the customer and don't support your AE, then you lose your value in the company. So all times are
Yeah.
kind of a risk. It's a fine line to walk.
It's a tough role, as you say, because you built your network off trust, like a lot of trust, I can imagine. So yeah, as you say, you've got to walk the line of, okay, I'm employed here, but also this is this is everything, right? And you
But
can't
then, but
tarnish
then why? Like this is what I get on my horse about. Like
that.
there's nothing wrong with selling, right? You like a product, you buy a product. I buy a bike or a pair of trainers for running, and I say I like
Yeah.
this, Stefan. You should buy these.
Yeah.
And you're either going to say, and you don't know at the time, like forgetting like Instagram endorsements, whatever. Like me saying I think it's a good product, right? You can take that skeptically or you can take it positively. The same as like
Mm.
I don't hide my title or what I work for. So when I say Anecdotes is a good product, I bought it before. I think it'll solve your problem. Yes, I work for them. And yes, it might not be the right fit. Let's find out down the line. If someone says no to me, if our relationship is that shallow that because I tried to suggest my product to them when I think it might be a fit for them, that they now don't want to talk to me, then there probably isn't a relationship there to begin with, right? The reality
Fair
is if you
point.
don't like it, say no. People try and pitch products to me all the time. And I say no, but I don't get offended if like because they tried to sell them to me. That's our jobs. Whoever you are, like our CEO will tell you, if you listen to this, but you probably won't. Um, Everyone's job in a company is to sell.
Yeah.
So as soon as you wear any form of branded like merchandise, it's your job to sell. So like if someone else doesn't like that, they just say, "Oh no," and Jake, by the way, I don't like being pitched to. And I say, "Fine, that's cool. Let's move on and talk about cycling or football or whatever it is, right?" But you can't be scared to pitch your own product. You work for a company because you think they're good.
Yeah.
So why should you not be allowed to tell people you think they're good?
I agree. So sales is like cursed word. It's like, oh, people are trying to sell, right? I feel like because I worked in a couple of industries on the recruiting side, but mainly in tech. And typically cyber, I don't know, it has this like a bit of a weird feel around sales, especially to practitioners. Like, but you're exactly right. It's like if I was looking at buying a pair of running shoes, I said, Jake, what running shoes do you have? I'd wanna hear about that, right? I'd want to know that. So it's an interesting dynamic.
I mean, the whole thing's problematic. I think there's maybe a cultural or a personality type in CISOs that they think that they've got to like stick it to the sales guys and like they're not going to like listen to any of this nonsense. These young guys driving their Porsches. And I think the problem is like the vendor CISO now wears a leopard belt. Like I speak at a lot of conferences, but the amount of times I get told, "We'd love to have you speak. Can you sponsor the conference?" I'm like, no, because I'm speaking on my behalf because I'm good at
Yeah.
speaking and because I know my subject matter. You either want me to speak or you don't. Like you shouldn't treat people differently because of the company they work for. And at the same time, like as CISOs, we have to buy stuff. So there has to be salespeople. But this whole like weird thing that's like got to be a constant war.
Mm.
Everyone's trying to do their job. Like we just need to just chill out a lot more in life.
I agree. And to wrap this up, we haven't really talked about anecdotes. Let's finish here. So high level, if folks haven't heard of anecdotes, who are you? What do you guys do? What problem do you solve?
Anecdotes is GRC automation for enterprise. So what we do is when you have to do like a SOC 2 or an ISO audit, whatever it is, and you have all that nonsense of like getting screenshots and asking person A to give you this information, then the auditor asks you to upload to their portal, and then they ask you questions, and the whole thing's a whole load of nonsense. We seamlessly integrate from tool all the way into auditor portal to submit the evidence as a constant flow to save a lot of time, effort, and just the stuff that no one likes doing. But unlike a lot of our competitors, the Drafters, Vantas, Secure Frames, who are great, great purchases for startups and kind of young companies. We focus really on the enterprise, the more complicated use cases. We're built for security out of the box, so completely custom built APIs, least privileged as granular and being data led. So we lead rather than just saying here's a green tick to say yes, encryption is on. We populate a JSON file and create and show the data that shows how we found that information every single time we asked it,
Hmm.
which is what a lot of our customers like, because then you can build custom rules off of that and say, well, look, if I've got all this data, what else can I learn? Can I find out that Stefan's on his MDM and he's now in China when he's supposed to be working in India? What the hell's he doing? And let's create some red flags and learn from the data that our security and compliance that gives us. So we do some cool stuff. If you want to learn more, they're welcome to. If they don't, they don't.
Cool. Yeah, I love it. And on the GRC piece, are you guys, is your bias CISOs? 'Cause I've seen some GRC companies that are looking at sales enablement as well as like the CISO. Do you do both or?
So we have a trust center product, which is obviously sales enablement, but in reality, because we sell to a more enterprise type customer, that's often like a tertiary thing they add on and ask legal or sales they want at the time. Our buyer
Yeah.
is often not even the CISO, they might be the sign off, but in the company size we work out, which is like 5,000 plus, there's usually like a director or head of GRC or GRC management team or compliance management team. That's usually our buyer. The
Yeah.
CISO is usually the point of entry at most.
Great. Well, yeah, Jake, it's been a pleasure to have you on. I appreciate your insights and comments. And to wrap it up, is there anything that you wanted to finish with?
No, I appreciate all these chances to talk. I think it's great that we have a recruitment industry that wants to hear from people, and whatever that's used for, it's used for, right? But the same way that I say I should be able to sell my product, you should be able to sell yours. So no, I think that we need to get more of a networking and community feel where people express their opinions and we actually listen to each other and try and get to a much more considered world, where as security leaders, rather than trying to blame each other every time something goes wrong and say, he should have done that, why didn't they do that? We accept the fact this is hard, warts and all, and we find a way to move forward in a more community-based manner.
Yeah, very cool. And a great week to end show. So thanks again for coming on, Jake.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate you
Thanks,
having me.
dude.
Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed today's show, please like and share with your friends and colleagues, as this is really important for the show's reach. If you'd like to be our next guest or are interested in Aspiron Search's staffing solutions, please get in touch directly with me or reach out to us via our website www.aspironsearch.com.